This plant is the Big Bluestem, Andropogon gerardii, Andropogon, new word, Gerardii, in the Poaceae. The Poaceae is the grass family, and the Big Bluestem is one of the tall grasses that made up the tall grass prairie that was in central part of North America and would have been on Lake Forest College's campus and is now on Lake Forest College's campus. As you can see here, this is our own version of a tall grass prairie with the Big Bluestem growing and blowing in the wind in the background. Grasses are the most important family in the world, both ecologically and economically. The grass family, the Poaceae, dominates ecosystems that we call grasslands or savannas throughout the world. The prairie in North America, the pampas in South America, the steppes in Europe and Asia, and the savannas in Africa are all grasslands that are ecologically dominated by grasses. We humans, feed ourselves on grasses. The most important crops in the world in terms of human nutrition are all grasses. Those are corn and wheat and rice, rye, oats, barley, millet, sorghum, and several others. And one of the reasons that grasses have become so nutritionally important to us has to do with their mode of pollination, which is wind pollination. As you can see on a close-up here of a flowering stalk, you can see the stamens. They're kind of long and orangish brown. And if you look carefully in between, you see these feathery organs that are purplish, and those are the pistils. And all of the grasses are wind pollinated. And part of the wind pollination syndrome is that there are no petals or sepals. So you don't see any petals or sepals, but these are true flowers. What you're seeing here are a couple dozen flowers, each of which has 3 stamens and 1 pistil. And you're seeing the stigma of the pistil. If a wind-pollinated plant had sepals and petals, then a lot of the pollen that gets blown in the wind would just immediately land against the sepals and petals and not be transported to another individual of the same species in order to effectuate pollination and fertilization. So reduction, especially of the petals and sepals, is an important correlation with wind pollination. The other thing that's important that gets us back to the nutrition is that most wind-pollinated plants have just 1 seed per fruit. If you think back to the description I gave in the first day of class to the particulars of the flower, I drew many ovules in a fruit and said that as the ovary matures, it becomes the fruit, and as the ovules mature, they become the seeds. And when you think about most things that you eat that have seeds in it, they usually have more than 1 seed, with the exception of perhaps the avocado. But most things that have seeds in them have more than 1 seed. But when a wind-pollinated plant casts its pollen out into the air, unlike when a plant is pollinated by a bee, where a bee will take the pollen from one individual of a species and take it directly to another individual of the same species, the pollen cast out in the wind is completely random, and it has to land on these feathery stigmas, and so the chances are greatly reduced. And so in wind pollination syndrome, we very often see just 1 seed because what's the likelihood that more than 1 pollen grain is just going to be cast on the wind and land on one particular feathery stigma? And so in the grasses in particular, that 1 seed has been provided with a tremendous amount of nutrients. The seeds are single seed in each fruit is well provided for, and in many of those grasses, those well-provided seeds have produced nutrition for us. The other thing about grasses, as I'm sure you know, they have long, thin leaves. In most of the cases, also correlated with wind pollination. The thinness of the leaf makes it less likely that pollen will get blown into a leaf. And most of the time, in most grasses, the leaves are well below the inflorescence. In the grasses, leaves have both blades and sheaths, and so the blade is what you think of as the leaf, but you see the point where the leaf hits the stem. Actually, the leaf continues below. You can see above the point where the leaf hits the stem, there's kind of a purplish stem, but below it's greenish, and that's a continuation of the leaf. So the leaf has two components, a sheath and a blade in the grasses. And this some close-ups of the reproductive parts. These are the stamens, and these are the feathery stigmas of Big Bluestem, Andropogon gerardii in the Poaceae.